Hello everyone, my name is Sophia. I'm a junior in high school and I'll be teaching a lesson of Intro into Psychology. So let's first start off with the lesson summary. Students will learn about the different approaches to psychology, and afterwards you'll be able to understand the importance and the different scientific foundations of psychology. So what exactly is psychology and why is it important to study? Well, psychology is the study of behavior and mind. Psychology allows us to understand more about how the body and mind work together. This can help with decision making, time management, achieving goals, and overall living effectively. A quote that I like by Shakespeare is, "There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so," and this pretty much wraps up psychology and the importance of it. So what are the 5 approaches? Well, there are 7 approaches in total to psychology, but today I'll be discussing the 5 main ones. So let's first define approach in psychology term. Approach is a perspective, example of view, that involves certain assumptions, example beliefs about human behavior, the way we function, which aspects of them are worthy of study, and what research methods are appropriate for undertaking this study. So let's first start off with the behavioral approach. And this is an approach to understanding the behavior of humans and other animals, basically why we do things that we do. People who believe in behavioral approach are often called behaviorists, and a good example of behaviorist would be Ivan Pavlov. He trained dogs to salivate in response to the sound of a tone. Another example would be John B. Watson, and he is an American behaviorist who once said that psychology should be the science of behavior. He conducted a very famous experiment called Little Albert, where he conditioned a baby to have a fear of a rat. Behaviorists often argue that we can be conditioned to get rid of a fear or have a fear. An example would be people who have phobia of spiders, they can go to therapy and be conditioned to get rid of that fear. Next, we have the Psychoanalytic / Psychodynamic approach, and this focuses on unconscious internal conflicts to explain mental disorders, personality, and motivation. But what exactly is the unconscious, and what is unconscious internal conflicts? Well, this is going to be parts of the body which is inaccessible to the conscious mind. For example, would be your bloodstream. You don't necessarily know it's happening, but it's happening in your body. An example of the psychoanalytic approach would be one-on-one therapy. You often see this in movies. You see a therapist and a patient. The therapist is taking notes while the patient is speaking about their feelings. The creator of this is Sigmund Freud. He often refers to himself as the father of psychoanalysts. He's an Austrian neurologist, which is someone who studies the brain, and a founder of Psychoanalysis, a clinical method of treating disorders through dialogue with patients. Next, we have the biological approach, where this examines how complex chemical and biological processes within the nervous system and endocrine system are related to the behavior of organisms. Many biological psychologists think that the mind is what the brain does. A good example of the biological approach would be inheritance. Do we inherit intelligence, or are we just born intelligent? Another example would be nature versus nurture. When you adopt a child, do they adapt to your environment, or do they have their biological parents' traits? A good example of a biological psychologist would be Hermann von Helmholtz, and he is known for his discoveries of vision, hearing, perception of space, color vision, perception of sound, how we see, how we hear, and how we perceive those. Next, we have the cognitive approach. And this is a theory that explains that behavior and mental processes are influenced by thoughts, attitudes, memory, and expectation. An example of this would be you don't want to go skiing because you have a bad memory of skiing. You don't want to do a certain task because you had a bad experience of that task. A cognitive psychologist would be John Piaget, and he is a Swiss psychologist who studied children development and discovered the theory of cognitive development. Lastly, we have the sociocultural approach, and this examines cultural differences and attempt to understand, predict, and control behavior. An example of this would be different cultures interpret gestures, body language, and spoken language differently from one another. And a more depth example would be, in America, we shake hands to greet someone, but in other countries, they may bow down. A good example of the sociocultural psychologist would be Lev Vygotsky, and he is a Soviet psychologist who believed that social interaction is important to development. So why is this important, and why should we study the different approaches? Well, there are so many different approaches to psychology. Not one is more correct or less correct. Psychology is a complex subject, and with these approaches, it allows us to narrow it down and figure out why we function as human beings. So let's do a quick review. We have the behavioral, which explains behavior, psychoanalytic, which explains conflicts with yourself and lets you talk it out. Biological, basically biology, your brain, how it functions. Cognitive, our memories influence us and our thought process. And sociocultural, how society affects different cultures. If you have any questions, you can email me, and I listen to some videos down below that help review the 7 different approaches and help you remember them. Thank you for watching.